At last we set out again, and 3 days later we arrived in Omsk. Back in Tobolsk, I had obtained some information about our future immediate superiors. The commandant was a very decent man, but Drill Major Krivstov was a scoundrel, such as there are few of, a petty barbarian, a stickler for regulations, a drunk, and everything repulsive one can imagine. The first thing he did was to call Durov and me idiots and promised to subject us to corporal punishment the first time we got out of line. He had already been the major of the prison guard for 2 years then and perpetrated the worst injustices. 2 years later, he was court-martialed, and thank God I was rid of him. He always used to land on us when drunk. I never saw him sober. Pick on some inmate who obviously hadn't had anything to drink and beat him under the pretext that the man was dead drunk. Another time, while he was making his nightly rounds, he belabored one inmate for sleeping on his right side, another for crying or talking in his sleep, for anything that his drunken head could think up. And this was the sort of man with whom I had to try to live without getting hurt. The sort of man whose job it was to write reports about us and submit evaluations about us to Petersburg every month. I had already made the acquaintance of hard labor camp elements back in Tobolsk, and in Omsk I prepared myself to live among them for the next 4 years. They are a coarse, irritated, and embittered lot. Their hatred for the gentry passes all limits, and for this reason they displayed hostility at the sight of us, along with a malicious joy at seeing us in such a sad plight. They would have devoured us if given the chance, but you can imagine for yourself how protected we were when we had to live, sleep, eat, and drink side by side with these people for several years, and when we didn't even have the time to complain about their insults of every shape and description, so numerous were they. Quote, "You of the gentry, you've pecked at us enough with your iron beaks. You used to be a gentleman and kick people around, and now you're lower than the lowest of us," end of quote. This was the theme played to us over and over again for 4 years. 150 enemies never tired of persecuting us. They enjoyed it. It was an occupation for them, a distraction, and the only way for us to avoid the worst of it was by meeting it with indifference, with a display of moral superiority that they couldn't fail to understand and respect in us, and by refusing to submit to their will. They were always conscious of the fact that we were above them. They had no conception of what crime we could have committed, and we ourselves kept silent about it, so they did not understand us any more than we understood them. And we had to bear the brunt of the desire to avenge and to torment the gentry by which these people breathe and live. Our life was very difficult. The military forced labor camps are tougher than the civilian. I spent the entire 4 years within the confines of the penitentiary, behind walls, except when I was sent out to work. Although the work was not always unbearably hard, there were times in rough weather on humid days, when the mud was deep, or in winter when the cold was excruciating, when I felt I was at the end of my strength. Once I spent 4 hours doing some emergency work when the mercury froze and it was perhaps 40 degrees below zero. My foot got frostbitten on that occasion. We lived in a heap, all of us, in one barracks. Picture to yourself an old ramshackle wooden structure that should have been torn down long ago and that was no longer inhabitable. In the summer it was stuffy beyond description, and winter unbearably cold. All the floors were rotted through and covered with an inch-thick layer of filth, on which we slipped and fell. The windows, small as they were, would get so thickly covered with hoarfrost that it was almost impossible to read even in the daytime. There was as much as an inch of ice on the glass. The ceiling dripped, there were cracks clean through it, and we were crowded in there like herring in a barrel. They would light the stove and put half a dozen logs into it, but that didn't make it any warmer. The ice in the room would hardly even melt. The place got so full of smoke that it was hardly bearable, and so it went the whole winter long. In that very barracks room, the inmates did their laundry, splashing water all over the place. There wasn't room to turn around in. We couldn't go out to the latrines between dusk and dawn because the barracks was locked then. So during those hours, a tub was placed by the door, and the stench was unspeakable. All the inmates reeked like pigs, and they would say, "A man can't help acting like a pig, since, as they put it, he's alive after all." We slept on bare boards and were allowed only one pillow. We had only our half-length sheepskins to cover us, so our legs were exposed all night. All night we shivered. There were fleas and lice and cockroaches by the bucketful. In winter we wore ragged half-length sheepskins that gave us almost no warmth, and short boots. And that is how we had to go out in below freezing temperatures. Our fare consisted of bread and cabbage soup, in which there was supposed to be 1/4 pound of beef per man. But they used chopped meat, and I never saw any of it. On holidays, there was hardly any fat in our gruel, and during Lent, we had hardly anything besides cabbage and water. I had terrible diarrhea and several times was seriously ill. Judge for yourself whether it was possible to stay alive without money. Well, I can tell you that if I hadn't had any, I should certainly have died. No inmate could have stood the life. In fact, everyone worked selling something to make himself a kopeck. So I had my tea and a piece of meat to eat now and then, and that is what saved me. It was also impossible to do without some tobacco to smoke, otherwise you would have suffocated in that foul air. But it all had to be done on the sly. Often I lay sick in the hospital. My unstrung nerves gave rise to epileptic attacks, although they were fairly rare. I'm still troubled by rheumatism in my legs. Apart from that, I feel in quite good health. Add to all these niceties the fact that it was virtually impossible to get hold of a book, and that if you did, you could read it only on the sly, that you lived in the midst of relentless quarrels and hostility, foul abuse, shouting, noise, and din, that you're always under guard, never by yourself, and all that for 4 years without let-up. Well, one should really be excused for saying that it was bad, all that, plus the awareness that at any moment you were answerable for the breach of some rule, the shackles, and the complete crushing of the spirit, gives you a picture of my daily life there. I shall not tell you what has happened to my soul, my beliefs, my intelligence, and my heart in these 4 years. It would be too long to tell, but the constant communion with my inner self in which I took refuge from bitter reality bore fruit. I now have many needs and hopes such as I had never thought of before. But I suppose this sounds mysterious, so let's drop it. One thing, though, don't forget me and help me out. I must have books and money. Send me some, in the name of Christ. Omsk is a nasty little town. It has hardly any trees. In summer, there are scorching heat and winds loaded with sand, and winter snowstorms. I haven't seen the countryside yet. The town itself is a grimy garrison town, debauched to the last degree. I'm speaking about the uneducated masses. If I hadn't found some nice people here, I should have perished altogether. K.I.I.V. treated me like his own brother. He did everything within his power to help me. I owe him some money. If you happen to see him in Petersburg, thank him. I owe him about 25 silver rubles. But how can I ever repay him for his hospitality, his constant readiness to respond to every request I might make, and for the care and concern he showed me as though I were his own brother? And he was not the only one. There are very many noble people in the world, brother. As I have already written you, your silence sometimes tortured me. Thank you for sending me money. Write me as fully as possible about everything to do with you in your very first letter, even if you send it through regular channels, because I'm still not certain whether I am allowed to communicate with you. Write about Amelia Fyodorovna, the children, about all our friends and relatives, about our Moscow family. Let me know who is dead and who is still alive. Tell me how your business is going and what capital you used to get started, whether it has been profitable, whether you have made something, and finally, whether you'll be able to help me out with money and how much you'll be able to send me every year. But don't send me any money in the official letter unless I fail to find myself another address. In the meantime, send it as from Mikhail Petrovich. You know what I mean. I still have some money, but no books. If you can, send me some magazines of the current year. Notes of the Fatherland, for instance. But here's something that is essential. I need, and need badly, historians of the ancient period, in French translation, and the new economists, Vico, Guizot, Thierry, Thiers, Rank, and so forth. And the church fathers. Pick the cheapest and most compact editions. Send them right away. I'm being sent to Semipalatinsk, which is almost all the way out in the Kyrgyz steppe. I shall send you my address later. In any case, here it is. Private Dostoyevsky, 7th Battalion of the Siberian Regiment of the Line, Semipalatinsk. Use this official address for letters. For the books, I'll give you another. And in the meantime, write as from Mikhail Petrovich. But understand, the book I need first of all is a German dictionary. I don't know what there is in store for me in Semipalatinsk, and I am quite unconcerned about it too, but here's something I'm concerned about. Get busy on my case. Get someone to intercede for me. Find out whether it couldn't be arranged for me to be transferred to the Caucasus in a year or two. At least that's Russia. This is my fervent wish. Do your utmost in the name of Christ. Brother, don't forget me. Here I am writing to you and making disposition of everything, even of what you own. But my faith in you has not been extinguished. You are my brother, and you love me. I need money. I must live, brother. These years will not be spent fruitlessly. I need money and books. Whatever you spend on me will not be lost. You won't be despoiling your children if you give it to me. I'll make it up to them handsomely if only I remain alive. Why, they're sure to allow me to publish in 6 years or so, and possibly even before that. Why, they are sure to allow me to publish in 6 years or so. You know many things can change, and now I won't write any trash. You'll hear of me. We'll see each other very soon, brother. I am as sure of it as I am of 2 times 2. The outlook is bright. I see clearly before me my entire future and all things I shall accomplish. I'm satisfied with my life. There's only one thing to fear. Men and their arbitrariness. If I fall into the hands of a superior who takes a dislike to me, and there are such people, he can find fault and spell my doom, or kill me with heavy work. And I am physically so weak as to be quite incapable of bearing all the hardships of a soldier's life. To cheer me up, people tell me, "Why, you'll meet nothing but simple folk there." Yes, but I'm more apprehensive of a simple man than of a complicated one still. Wherever they are, people are people. Even in penal servitude, I learned in those 4 years to discern the human beings among the bandits. Believe me, there are profound, strong, beautiful natures among them, and what a pleasure it was to find gold under the rough cover. And I didn't find just 1 or 2 instances, but several of them. Some you cannot fail to respect, and others are positively admirable. There was a young Circassian, sent there for robbery, whom I taught to speak and write Russian. You should have seen all the marks of gratitude he showed me. Another inmate cried when he said goodbye to me on leaving. I had given him some money, but how much could it have been? Yet his gratitude was limitless, and this in spite of the fact that, my character having turned bad, I had often been ill-tempered and impatient with them. They respected my state of mind and bore everything uncomplainingly. Apropos, how many types of the common people and characters did I carry away with me from the prison camp? I lived together with them, and so I think I know them quite well. I've heard so many stories of vagabonds and robbers and, in general, of their joyless and miserable lives. There's enough for volumes and volumes. What a wonderful people. On the whole, my time hasn't been wasted. I may not have seen Russia, but I got to know the Russian people well. As well, perhaps, as few know them. Well, this is a touch of vanity on my part, but I hope it is forgivable.